Hey, we are the Lab Doctors. I'm Amanda.
I'm Dorothy.
And I'm Zhao Yong.
We are biomedical researchers who realized we still have a lot to learn about science.
So why not join us on this quest?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lab Doctors podcast. So this week, we're going to be talking about sweeteners again. I was kind of curious. I know I gave a bit of a short summary last week, but this week we will be diving deeper. So do you remember the two health-related things that I talked about?
Cancer.
Yep, cancer and...
I can't even remember.
Cardiovascular diseases.
I didn't talk about that, but I think I told you that I was going to look into cardiovascular disease. The second one was gut microbiome.
Oh,
Right.
Yeah, so that's what I'll be talking about today. The effect of artificial sweeteners on cancer risk, what it does to your gut microbiome, and
I don't
also
wanna know.
and heart disease, because there was a recent paper on that too. I
Okay.
just feel like it's good to know, you know.
Everything in moderation. Okay, let's go.
Okay, so the cancer risk and heart disease risk is from this cohort called the Nutrinet Santé. It's a French web-based cohort dedicated to investigating associations between nutrition and health. So enrollment of participants from the French population was initiated in May 2009 and is still ongoing.
So long, okay.
Yeah, so for these two studies, right, the number of participants is over 100,000.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a pretty big group, and the follow-up average is about 7.8 years. So they follow these people for like a really long time. Okay, let's talk about cancer first. So in the cancer risk study, there was over 102,000 participants, followed up over an average of 7.8 years. Out of all the artificial sweeteners, can you guess which are the most common?
Aspartame.
Yes, aspartame and the other.
Asulfame potassium.
Yes, asulfame potassium or asulfame K. So it's similar to like the global averages, I guess. So these make up around 58% and 29% of intakes respectively. So all participants' intakes were below acceptable daily intake. So the most common foods consumed that contain these sweeteners were soda drinks with no added sugar and tabletop sweeteners. So before we get into the results, here's a basic explanation of how they did the analysis. So they categorized the participants into three groups: non-consumers, lower consumers, and higher consumers. So how they distinguish between low and high consumers is they just took the median of all the consumption numbers. For example, in men, it was 17.44 milligram per day. That was the median. So everyone who consumed less than 17.44 milligrams, they were the lower consumers, and then more is the higher consumers. So that's how they categorize all the people. Okay, so what they found was compared to non-consumers, higher consumers of aspartame and asulfame K had a higher risk of overall cancer.
But it's still below the acceptable level, right?
As in like how much they intake.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So actually the hazard ratio is 1.13. So it's a 13% higher risk.
Of cancer.
Yeah. What they found was that compared to non-consumers, higher consumers of artificial sweetener had a 13% higher risk of overall cancer.
Okay.
They found this association to be true also for aspartame and asulfame K. But they mentioned that this doesn't mean other sweeteners like sucralose doesn't affect cancer risk. It could just be due to not enough statistical power. They also observed a higher risk for breast cancer and obesity-related cancer. So in this study, they also found that like generally in women, there were higher levels of consumption of artificial sweeteners. So this could be the case for why they found the association with breast cancer. However, this is not to say that it doesn't affect other cancers. They are just less common. So there's not enough data to conclusively derive an association. Perhaps the most important caveat of this study is that these are association. It doesn't really establish causality. So it's not to say that artificial sweeteners cause cancer.
Okay.
That said, the authors conclude that the findings do not support the use of artificial sweeteners as a safe alternative for sugars in foods and beverages, and that the data suggests that artificial sweetener and excessive sugar intake may be equally associated with cancer risks.
Is there a difference between the higher intake and the lower intake group?
They did not report, so I think not really, or like not significant.
Okay.
Okay, so before we talk about cardiovascular risk, which was in a similar cohort, let's go into gut microbiome for a bit. So this is in a separate cohort where they did a more experimental approach, not just observational. So the first study that I'm going to talk about was done in 2020 in Canada to study whether non-nutritive artificial sweeteners, specifically aspartame and sucralose, affect gut microbiota, which could in turn alter glucose metabolism. So they had 17 healthy participants undergo a 14-day treatment period where each participant consumed a standardized dose of sweeteners. Fecal samples were collected before and after treatments to analyze the gut microbiome. So in this study, this 17 participant study, they found no difference in the median relative proportions of the most abundant bacterial taxa. So basically, they analyzed the stools of these people before and after the so-called treatment, the treatment being artificial sweeteners, and they found no difference. However, more recently, there was another study by Dr. Elinav where 120 healthy volunteers were randomly assigned to 6 groups. So aspartame, saccharin, stevia, sucralose, glucose, which is the control sugar group, and no supplement, which is the control group. So again, all these participants consume lower than the FDA recommended daily intake or acceptable daily intake. So in terms of glycemic response or regulation of blood glucose levels, the researchers found that the groups consuming saccharin and sucralose had a significantly elevated glycemic response during exposure to artificial sweeteners, but no significant effect was found in the other group. So when they analyzed the stool microbiome samples from these participants before and after consumption, they found that all 4 of tested artificial sweeteners altered bacteria in the gut and the molecules that they secrete.
Okay.
So basically in this cohort of like 120 people, they divided it into 6. So each group had 20 participants, and then they had these participants like consume different types of sweeteners, right? So there were 4 different types of sweeteners. And then there were 2 control groups, one being like normal glucose, so not artificial sweeteners, just sugar, and then like no sweetener. So all this is very preliminary, but the human microbiome, the gut microbiome, is affected by artificial sweeteners, and it changed glycemic response, so blood glucose levels following consumption of these sweeteners.
But I thought you said the first part there was no change in
that first study.
In the highest biota bacteria.
There's no change in the most abundant bacterial taxa.
But then how come there's change in the gut microbiome?
These are 2 different studies.
Oh, okay.
So far, artificial sweetener consumption was linked to cancer risks and is associated with microbiome changes.
Okay,
lastly, cardiovascular risk. So this is the same French cohort and there were 103,000 participants included. So as before, they analyzed the population according to non-consumers, lower consumers and higher consumers. And they found that total artificial sweetener intake was associated with 9% higher risk in all heart disease.
Total artificial sweetener intake?
So from both low consumers and high consumers.
Okay.
Artificial sweetener consumption was particularly associated with cerebrovascular disease. So that's conditions that affect the blood flow and the blood vessels in the brain. So for example, the most common one is stroke.
Okay.
So aspartame intake was associated with a 17% higher risk of cerebrovascular events, while asulfame K and sucralose were associated with increased coronary heart disease. However, the same limitations apply as before. So this study is a web-based study. So it's fully reliant on people's memory and self-reporting. So just to end off, I would say like after reading all these papers, right, I wouldn't fully condemn artificial sweeteners, but it's just important to be wary of them.
Yeah, I'm thinking if like the 9% or 13%, is it really a lot? Doesn't sound like a lot to me compared to other.
So for example, like smoking and COPD, for example, that's like a 6 times higher risk. So that would be like a 600%.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So actually like 9% is
It's
like,
not.
Yeah, it's not even 2 times.
I guess the question is, do these detriments outweigh the benefits? And I guess still everything in moderation, basically. Like you should do water first. I mean, if you really can't, then like artificial sweetened drinks, I guess.
Yeah. So I just wanted to like point out that like the risk is not crazy high.
Yeah.
So
I think we can deal with this amount.
But yes, so the bottom line is consume less sugar if possible. Like just don't consume sugar. And then if you have to, you can just take drinks with artificial sweeteners, but in moderation.
But a bit hard, right? A lot of our drinks still have the natural sweeteners, sugars. Like all the canned drinks.
Yeah, that's why just go for Coke Zero. Same Coke tastes 0 calories.
No, go for water. And then
Sponsor
if
me,
you
Coke.
want to drink Coke, you can go for Coke Zero. But not all the time. I think my conclusion is like just be more mindful of what you are consuming.
Well, but are you happy?
And as usual, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Spotify. A like and a comment will really help us out.
You can also follow us on our social media, Instagram, Twitter or Facebook, and feel free to DM us any questions.
Alternatively, you can email us at thelabdoctors@gmail.com. We'll post the links in the episode description so you can check that out if you're interested.
Bye!